I told you that in some countries it's actually illegal to frown, or that in others you could face a fine for simply forgetting your wife's birthday? Sounds ridiculous, right? But believe it or not, these are real laws. Today, we're embarking on a global journey through some of the most absurd, hilarious, and downright bizarre laws that have ever existed, or are still in effect today. Get ready, because some of these regulations might just make you question humanity's collective sanity. But where do such laws even come from? Sometimes they're simply relics of the past that were never officially repealed. In other instances, they're an attempt to solve a very specific local problem, which from an outsider's perspective looks utterly comical. And sometimes logic simply goes out the window. So, let's dive into the world of legislative absurdity, from ancient civilizations right up to the present day. Let's kick things off with a true superstar in the world of bizarre laws, a regulation almost everyone's heard of, but few actually know the specifics. We're talking, of course, about Singapore and its famous ban on chewing gum. Yes, you heard that right. In this ultra-modern city-state, ordinary chewing gum is considered contraband. But why? It all boils down to the authorities' almost obsessive drive for cleanliness and order. This law was introduced back in 1992. The city was tired of spending millions cleaning gum off sidewalks, elevators, and public transport. The final straw came when vandals started sticking gum on train door sensors in the MRT, causing serious disruptions to the service. The solution was drastic: ban its import and sale entirely. If you're a tourist and bring a pack or two for personal use, you'll likely be fine. But if you're caught selling it, or, God forbid, you spit gum onto the sidewalk, prepare for a fine of 1,000 Singapore dollars. That's almost $750. So yes, when it comes to cleanliness, Singapore definitely doesn't mess around. Now, let's cross the channel and head to the United Kingdom, a nation steeped in history and yes, a fair share of its own unique quirks. Here, one of the most peculiar laws you'll find concerns the postal service, and surprisingly, the monarch. Specifically, placing a postage stamp with the monarch's image upside down is incredibly, technically considered an act of high treason. It sounds utterly absurd, doesn't it? But believe it or not, there's a certain logic behind this, albeit a very old one. Historically, such a gesture was interpreted as a direct insult to the crown, a blatant expression of contempt for the monarchy itself. It was akin to purposefully flying the national flag upside down, a universally recognised symbol of distress or protest. Now, before you panic, rest assured, today you're highly unlikely to be sent to the Tower of London for such an accidental oversight. No one is going to come knocking, ready to prosecute you to the full extent of the law over a mistakenly inverted stamp. Yet, the very fact that this peculiar statute, a clause within the Treason Act of 1848 no less, technically remains on the books, is quite astounding. So, next time you're sending a postcard from London, perhaps double-check which way King Charles III is facing on that stamp, just to be on the safe side. And speaking of the UK, prepare yourself for another truly peculiar piece of legislation. Apparently, it's strictly forbidden to die within the Palace of Westminster, the very building where Parliament convenes. And the reason isn't some mystical belief, or that it would disrupt ongoing debates. The truth behind it is far more mundane, and yet utterly absurd. You see, the Palace of Westminster is technically a royal palace, and under that status, anyone who dies within its walls is, by law, entitled to a state funeral paid for by the Crown. Just imagine the astronomical expense. Therefore, should a lord or an MP suddenly fall ill inside, the immediate priority becomes getting them outside the building as swiftly as possible. Picture the scene. Someone clutches their chest, and instead of calling for a doctor, security guards frantically attempt to usher them out of the building. While many dismiss this as nothing more than an urban legend, this law is cited so frequently that in 2007 it was actually voted the most absurd law in the United Kingdom. Regardless, the understanding is that palace staff are discreetly instructed to avoid deaths on the premises at all costs. And to cap off our British trilogy of absurdity, here's a law that just reeks of the sea and the Middle Ages. The thing is, to this very day, any sturgeon or whale washed ashore in the United Kingdom legally belongs to the Crown. Yes, it's not just any fish. It's officially designated royal fish. This law dates back to the 14th century, to the reign of King Edward II. Back then, sturgeon was considered the ultimate delicacy, fit only for the royal table. And whales were a source of incredibly valuable resources: blubber for lamps, meat and baleen for corsets. Essentially, they were floating treasures, and the monarchs simply claimed them. There was even a rather amusing division. The whale's head went to the king, and the tail to the queen. And don't think this is just some forgotten historical quirk. The law is still very much in effect. If you find a dolphin, porpoise, or sturgeon on a beach, you are legally obliged to report it to a designated official. So, if you spot a whale on the shore, know that it's His Majesty's property. So, let's leave foggy Albion behind and head to sunny Italy, specifically to the global fashion capital, Milan. Here, you'll find arguably the most positive, yet no less peculiar law. A city ordinance mandates that everyone in the city, residents and visitors alike, must constantly smile. Yes, you heard that right. If you're caught with a frown or a grim expression in public, you could face a very real fine. Naturally, the lawmakers did show some compassion. There are exceptions. The rule does not apply to those attending a funeral or visiting a hospital. Under these sombre circumstances, frowning is permitted. However, in all other situations, whether you're strolling through Piazza del Duomo or enjoying a shopping spree, your face is expected to radiate joy. This law dates back to the time of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and, in essence, has never been officially repealed. Its original intent was to project an image of a friendly and prosperous city. So, if you're heading to Milan, make sure to bring your good mood with you. It might just save you some money. If you thought Milan's smile law was the peak of Italian legal quirks, then buckle up. Let's head south to the picturesque resort town of Tropea. Picture this: azure waters, pristine beaches, endless sunshine, and a beach morality police. A local ordinance there actually decreed that women who are ugly, fat, or old were forbidden from appearing on the beach in bikinis. No joke, that's the literal wording. Conversely, young and attractive women, whose appearance, according to the lawmakers, glorifies the beauty of the female body, were, of course, exempt from this ban. One has to wonder, who exactly was defining these criteria? Was there a designated person at the beach entrance, armed with scorecards? This law is nothing short of a blatant example of subjectivity and discrimination, ostensibly passed to protect public aesthetics. Thankfully, it's highly unlikely anyone enforces it today, but the mere fact of its existence in the city's statutes is simply mind-boggling. Moving on from the beach-related discussions in Italy, let's cross over to its neighbour France, a country renowned for its exquisite cuisine, high fashion, and a rather unique reverence for its history. Here you'll find a law that sounds straight out of a comedy sketch. It's actually illegal for French citizens to name their pigs Napoleon. And believe it or not, this is no joke. This peculiar legislation was enacted specifically to protect the honour and dignity of the great emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. For France, Napoleon is far more than just a historical figure. He's a towering national symbol, a man who profoundly shaped the destiny of the nation and, indeed, all of Europe. To associate his esteemed name with a pig, an animal often viewed quite unfavourably in popular culture, was considered the ultimate act of disrespect, bordering on subversive activity. Naturally, it's highly unlikely that modern-day police are actively raiding farms to check the names of piglets. This law is now more of a quaint relic from the past, an amusing vestige of an era when insulting symbols of authority could carry serious penalties. Nevertheless, it remains on the books, a quirky yet telling reminder of just how deeply the French cherish their national heritage. And now, let's journey to Switzerland, the land of impeccable order, world-renowned banks, and exquisite chocolate. You might expect everything here to be meticulously governed by strict logic. Yet surprisingly, that's not always the case. One of the most famous peculiarities of Swiss life revolves around nighttime quiet and plumbing. In many apartment buildings across the country, there's a strict rule prohibiting flushing the toilet after 10 p.m. The reason is perfectly Swiss in its straightforward pragmatism: noise. It's widely believed that the sound of flushing water could easily disturb the sleep of light sleepers next door. After all, peace and quiet after dark are considered sacrosanct. So, residents are gently advised to handle their nocturnal needs before 10 p.m. or simply wait until morning. Breaking this rule can lead to complaints from neighbours and even formal discussions with building management. While it's not a federal law, but rather an internal regulation for many housing cooperatives, it's so widespread that it has practically become a national characteristic. Therefore, if you find yourself staying in a Swiss apartment, remember, after 10 in the evening, even the slightest flush could unfortunately become a source of conflict. And since we're on the subject of Swiss nighttime tranquility and toilets, here's another fascinating tidbit along similar lines, specifically concerning men. In addition to the ban on flushing, in these very same apartment buildings, after 10 p.m, men are forbidden to urinate standing up. Yes, you heard that right. The reason, as always, is to combat noise pollution. The argument is that the sound of a urine stream hitting the water from a standing position creates an acoustic effect deemed too loud and disturbing for neighbours. However, if done sitting down, the process becomes virtually silent. This prohibition, much like the previous one, is part of the internal regulations of many residential buildings. Interestingly, Germany has a similar practice, with even special signs in restrooms encouraging men to sit. In German, there's even a specific word for such men, a Sitzpinkler, literally a sit-pisser, referring to a man who pees while seated. So in Switzerland, the quest for silence infiltrates even the most intimate aspects of daily life, demanding that men demonstrate thoughtfulness and respect for their neighbours' sleep. Now let's leave tranquil Europe behind and journey to hot and exotic Asia, specifically Thailand, the land of smiles, ancient temples, and profound reverence for its monarchy. Here, there's a particular law every visitor needs to know, because violating it can lead to very serious consequences. In Thailand, stepping on any local currency, be it banknotes or coins, is a criminal offence. Why? The answer is simple. Every Thai baht features the image of the king. In Thailand, the king is not merely the head of state, he is a sacred and deeply revered figure. Any action that could be interpreted as disrespectful towards his likeness is considered an insult to the monarchy, and under local laws this can result in up to 15 years in prison. So, if you accidentally drop a coin on the floor, under no circumstances should you try to stop it with your foot. Instead, let it roll and pick it up with your hand. This law is a striking example of how cultural and religious traditions can directly influence legislation and daily life. Our journey through Asia continues, but we're now setting our sights on Polynesia, specifically the idyllic islands of Samoa. One might imagine life in such a beautiful setting would be utterly carefree, but think again, especially if you're a married man. Samoa has a law that could easily be dubbed the most romantic, or perhaps the most cunning in the world, depending on your perspective. Here's the catch. It's actually illegal to forget your own wife's birthday. That's right, it's not just a recipe for a domestic argument. It's a legitimate legal offence. If an offended wife decides to report her husband to the police, the forgetful spouse could face a stern talking to from the authorities and potentially even a fine. This law was introduced with a noble purpose: to strengthen family bonds and remind husbands of the importance of paying attention to their wives. It beautifully underscores how highly family and mutual respect are valued within Samoan culture. So, if you're a man living in Samoa, you might want to set a dozen reminders in your calendar. Because here, the innocent-sounding question, "Honey, did you forget something?" can have very real legal consequences. Next up, We're heading to the land of the rising sun, Japan, known for its technology, unique culture, and, as it turns out, some rather distinctive health laws. In 2008, Japan introduced the so-called metabolic law, or metabo law. Its primary goal is to combat obesity and related illnesses on a national level. According to this legislation, all citizens aged 40 to 74 are required to undergo an annual waist measurement. For men, the maximum allowed waistline is 85 centimetres. For women, it's 90 centimetres. So, what happens if you exceed these limits? You won't be personally fined or imprisoned. However, the companies and local authorities you work for can face penalties if they fail to take proactive measures. This gives employers a strong incentive to ensure their staff stay in shape. Individuals who exceed the prescribed limits are directed to special counselling sessions focusing on diet and physical activity. This law stands as a unique example of a government attempting to care for the nation's health by intervening in what many might consider a deeply personal area of life. Now let's touch upon a topic that's both spiritual and, well, a little bureaucratic. Our journey takes us to China. It's widely known that the state there seeks to control many aspects of its citizens' lives. But, as it turns out, not just this one, but the next one too. In China, there's an astonishing law in effect, one that directly impacts Buddhist monks and the concept of reincarnation. According to a decree from the State Administration for Religious Affairs, any Buddhist monk wishing to reincarnate must first obtain official permission from the government. Yes, you heard that right. The process of rebirth needs to be sanctioned by the authorities. An application for reincarnation must be submitted in advance to several government agencies. Of course, this law wasn't enacted to control souls. It's about a very earthly political objective. Its primary aim is to weaken the influence of the Dalai Lama, who traditionally approves the reincarnations of high-ranking lamas. In this way, the Chinese Communist Party has seized control over one of the key aspects of Tibetan Buddhism, effectively transforming a profound spiritual process into a bureaucratic procedure. It's time to journey across the ocean to a country that holds the undisputed title for the sheer number of bizarre and absurd laws, the United States of America. Let's kick things off in Florida, a state famous for its beaches, alligators, and some truly peculiar regulations concerning women. Technically, there's still a law on the books here that prohibits unmarried women from skydiving on Sundays. Should she dare to disobey, she could face a fine or even imprisonment. Where on earth did such an absurd rule originate? Legal historians can't provide a definitive answer. It's most likely a relic of outdated Puritan laws that strictly regulated women's behaviour, especially on the Lord's Day. Perhaps lawmakers thought an unmarried woman belonged in church on a Sunday, rather than soaring through the heavens. Or perhaps it was a clumsy attempt to protect women from a dangerous pastime. Whatever the case, today, of course, no one actually enforces this law, and it serves merely as an amusing historical anecdote that perfectly illustrates how peculiar old legal statutes can be. Continuing our American road trip, we're now headed to sunny Arizona. This state is famous for the Grand Canyon, its vast deserts and iconic cacti, but it's also home to one of the most frequently cited absurd laws in the world. In Arizona, by law, you are absolutely forbidden to let a donkey sleep in a bathtub. Let me repeat that. A donkey. In a bathtub. Sleeping. This law begs so many questions. Why a donkey? Why a bathtub? And why specifically sleeping? Legend has it that the law came into existence in the 1920s following a rather peculiar incident. Apparently, a farmer used to keep his donkey in an old bathtub in his yard. One day, a dam burst, and the ensuing floodwaters swept the bathtub, donkey and all, downstream. The rescue operation to extract the animal from the tub proved so complicated and costly that local authorities decided to take drastic preventative measures. They simply outlawed the practice altogether to prevent such an expensive incident from ever happening again. So, if you happen to own a donkey and a bathtub in Arizona, make sure they aren't in the same place at the same time, especially when your donkey is trying to catch some Z's. Venturing a bit north to Oklahoma, deep in the heart of the American South. Here, lawmakers have taken a rather unique approach to ensuring the well-being of our four-legged companions. Oklahoma actually has a law that prohibits teasing dogs by making faces at them. Yes, you heard that right. Attempting to make an aggressive or mean face at any dog, whether it's your own pet or a stranger's, could be considered an offence, potentially punishable by a fine or even arrest. At first glance, it might seem quite amusing, but when you consider it more deeply, there's a clear logic to it. This law was most likely designed to prevent situations where people intentionally provoke dogs into aggressive behaviour. After all, an animal's aggressive reaction is often a direct response to human provocation. It appears legislators decided the best way to prevent dog bites was to tackle the problem at its root by making it illegal to perform the very actions that could agitate a dog. So, when you're in Oklahoma, make sure to treat all dogs with the utmost respect. No taunting gestures or funny faces, unless you want to risk an unexpected introduction to local law enforcement. Let's head over to California, to the small city of Chico. The local authorities there have shown an absolutely unbelievable level of foresight and concern for public safety. Chico has a city ordinance that states anyone detonating a nuclear device within city limits faces a fine of $500. $500 for a nuclear explosion. This ordinance is truly a masterpiece of the absurd. It immediately raises several questions. First, did city officials genuinely fear that a resident might decide to unleash a local Armageddon? Second, who and how exactly were they planning to fine after a nuclear explosion? And third, doesn't a $500 fine seem a bit lenient for such an act? Most likely, this ordinance was adopted during the height of the Cold War as a symbolic gesture against nuclear weapons. But today, it stands as arguably the most ridiculous and utterly useless line in the city's code, bringing only smiles to anyone who learns about it. Continuing our journey through the bizarre world of US laws, we now land in Alabama. It seems local lawmakers there decided to clarify traffic regulations by enacting a law that's a strong contender for the Captain Obvious award. In Alabama, it's illegal to drive a car while blindfolded. Yep. Somewhere deep in the state's legal code, it explicitly states that a driver must be able to see the road. It's truly baffling to imagine what incident could have possibly prompted such a rule. Perhaps some overly confident daredevil or a contestant from a bizarre reality show decided to prove they could navigate a few blocks blindfolded. And, spoiler alert, it probably didn't end well. This law is a perfect example of how legislators sometimes have to create rules in response to the most unfathomable acts of human foolishness. Instead of simply issuing a ticket for reckless driving, the authorities opted to create a separate, incredibly specific prohibition. So, thanks Alabama for clarifying that for us. Now we definitely know not to try that at home. And now for a unique culinary and legal tale from Connecticut. The state takes pickle quality very seriously, approaching it with scientific precision and legislative strictness. According to state law, a pickle can officially be called a pickle only if it bounces. That's right. Drop it and it must bounce. This unusual law originated in 1948, all thanks to two enterprising fraudsters. They sold ordinary cucumbers to locals, passing them off as genuine pickles. Naturally, these fakes were completely inedible. When their scam was exposed, authorities took action. They consulted food safety experts who established this amusing quality criterion. It turns out a properly cured pickle has enough resilience to bounce when dropped from a height of 1 foot, about 30 centimetres. So, in Connecticut, testing a pickle for bounciness isn't just a quirky local tradition. It's a legitimate, legally mandated quality standard. Let's head south to the state of Georgia, where you might find yourself in hot water, not for what you're eating, but for how you're eating it. In the city of Gainesville, proudly known as the poultry capital of the world, there's a law that forbids eating fried chicken with utensils. Hands only. This law was passed in 1961 as a humorous PR stunt to put the city and its signature product on the map. The idea was to emphasize how incredibly delicious their fried chicken is. So delicious, in fact, that eating it with a fork and knife is practically sacrilege. You just have to savor it with your bare hands. And while the law is purely humorous in nature, from time to time, the police will jokingly arrest offenders. A 91-year-old tourist once had the distinct honour of such an encounter, only to be pardoned by the laughing mayor. So, if you ever find yourself in Gainesville and order a plate of their famous chicken, put that fork down. Here, it's not just a tradition, but practically the law, and arguably the tastiest one on our list. Now let's head over to the Lone Star State, Texas, famous for its cowboys, rodeos, and some truly unique approaches to hunting. Here, there's a law on the books that sounds like a scene straight out of an absurd western. In Texas, it's illegal to shoot a bison from the second story of a hotel. This naturally begs the question, is it perfectly fine from the first or third floor? The law, as is often the case, is a fascinating relic from the past, a remnant of the Wild West era. In the 19th century, bison hunting was rampant. Hunters often stayed in roadside hotels, and to save themselves the trouble, would simply shoot at herds directly from their room windows. This was not only unsportsmanlike, but also incredibly dangerous for anyone nearby. The law was enacted to compel hunters to go out into the field rather than firing from the comfort of a hotel. Exactly why the second floor is singled out in the law remains a bit of a mystery. Perhaps it was considered the most advantageous position for shooting. Today, with bison now a protected species, this law seems utterly ridiculous, but it remains on the books as a quirky reminder of the turbulent and wild times of Texas's frontier days. And so, after exploring 100 of the world's strangest laws, one surprising truth becomes clear. These rules aren't just historical anomalies or amusing quirks. They are a mirror reflecting the fears, prejudices, values, and even the unique sense of humour of the societies that created them. The law prohibiting dying in the Houses of Parliament isn't merely an absurdity, but a testament to a sacred respect for authority. The ban on naming a pig Napoleon in France is a fascinating echo of a rich and complex national history. Even the most ridiculous law, like the one prohibiting a donkey from sleeping in a bathtub, once perhaps addressed a very real and pressing problem for someone, a problem we can only speculate about today. These laws demonstrate just how diverse, inventive, and at times illogical humanity can be in its quest for order. So the next time you encounter something that seems utterly meaningless, remember this: behind every strange rule, there's almost always an equally peculiar story waiting to be told. Thank you for joining us on this wild journey to the very end. If you found this interesting, and perhaps even cracked a smile, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more fascinating stories. We read all your comments, and they truly help us grow and improve. Now, a question for you. Which of these 100 laws struck you as the most absurd? Or perhaps you know an even stranger law that we didn't mention? Let us know in the comments below.